Hello, come on in. I'm going to give folks a couple minutes to arrive, and I'm going to set up a chair for myself. That reminds me. Also, I had left a note. I don't know if you guys saw it because I put it in a different order. That I would love it if you guys have at least some of you brought a group, brought a dance, a link to a dance piece that. What was the description I gave? So you can take a quick look for one if you haven't got one. Where's my page? Is it this one? There we go. If you have a dance that represents a group and how that dance is or is not respected by today's culture. You can pick something that we watched in the last few weeks or a totally different dance video. And if we can get like 3 or 4 volunteers for that, that would be awesome. Yeah. Oh, there we go. No, I'm going to sit on my couch. Where's the best lighting in here? It's a mystery. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's okay. Cool. Thank you, Crystal. Hi, Ika. Yay.
Hello.
You. right, that's okay. Yeah, you made it. Hey, Josiah. Hi, Vijayna. Vijayna, can you help me to learn how to pronounce your name, please? Anybody?
Yes, it's Vincina.
Vincina. Aha. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think I was trying to do it Italian style.
No worries.
Vincina. I mean, because we all want to go eat pasta in Italy, right? Vincina. Thank you very much for helping me.
You're welcome.
Okay. How are you guys doing? Let's just start out and be a little social.
I'm doing good. It's Aika.
Hi, Aika. I'm glad you're doing good. Welcome back. Are you still jet lagged?
No, I already recovered, but it took me a very long time this time because previously, like I would go to school and I would keep myself busy, but this time I'm quarantining and like I don't go anywhere, and like when it gets closer to night, I just fell asleep, and it was hard to manage.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. How are you, Zafina? Oh, you're muted.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
I'm doing good. You know, the sun's out, so it feels nice.
Yes. I didn't expect that. It was really cold last night, so I was surprised the sun was out this morning. I like your bright green wall.
Oh, thank you.
Yay. Okay, Jesse. Jess is driving. Drive safe. All right. Where shall we start? Oh, I would love to hear, how did you do with the reading this time? Because we had some hardcore reading this time. Everybody's like, no. And I have two questions also, because I noticed, sorry, I haven't done up my lecture down here. This is where I've been doing my active classes, so I don't have my setup figured out just yet. So I noticed, I'll go ahead and screen share since hopefully you guys can say, I liked that article, I hated that article, I didn't read anything. I'm gonna just kind of locate us in the course. All right, we're done with that. We're done with that. Can you believe it? We're done with that for now. We're on week 3. So I noticed maybe I should pop this back open. We kind of touched on some of this stuff, but we didn't talk a lot about it last week. So I'm going to go back to some of those things. So did you guys get to read the new Tim Crow assignment, and did you have any reactions to it that you might want to share? I do. No?
I mean, I thought it was kind of interesting. I mean, I don't know. I think it's probably because, like, I mean, my high school class had to read this like senior year.
Oh, good.
And I guess it was like not as bad to read because like I had like a chance to, I guess, overview it back then. But I think like reading it like a second time around, I don't know how to describe it in a way that doesn't sound like messed up. But it's like as you read the article, or I guess the book rather, I don't know how to describe it. It's like, I think how the book describes it is like, it's not like just like Black people that have been like kind of historically manipulated, but I think with how I kind of viewed it, it kind of seems like, again, like I don't know how to make this like sound not controversial, but it sounds like, or it seemed like to me that poor white people were kind of like manipulated to kind of fight like, I guess, like the rich upper class white people's battles. I don't know if like that kind of any sense. But yeah, I mean, I just thought that was kind of interesting. Kind of added like a dimension to like, I guess what I had read before and stuff like that.
Yes, and I'm actually, yes, it's controversial, and that's great because that's sort of the theme of what I wanted to let us hash out today is, well, let me hear some more background. But yes, this question of how did other people become complicit, and how did our ideas about race in this country get founded is sort of, that's what we're going to dig deeper on today. Did anybody else have any responses to the new Jim Crow article, or had you read it before? Had you never read it before? What do you guys think? Anybody? Okay, here I'm gonna, am I gonna do this right now? I don't know. How about we just be honest and let me know if you didn't make it to that reading yet, because that'll tell me how much to like repeat myself or not repeat myself. Right?
This is Aika, and I haven't read it.
Okay. Thank you for your honesty. I like that.
Sorry.
And you guys can chat it too if you want to use the chat. Doot, doot. Okay. So that's good. All right. Let me then ask you another question about this article. So I noticed in this little, this is the Dancing Revolutions article. I noticed that when I posted this, I could read everything that I assigned, but I have now read it too many times, so it's not showing me the article anymore. So can you guys tell me whether you can read all of the assigned parts of this article, or because if not, then I will go make a PDF for you to get those bits out. Here, let me put this page in the chat so you guys, can you actually go check and see if it's visible? It's not the whole, you don't have to read the whole thing, but maybe copy and paste this. And then you can see, like, it should it should come up and show you what the search thing is, but for me it's not showing me that page anymore because I've read it too many times. But you guys probably haven't read it as many times yet because you don't need to load this page over and over again. So if you can see it, then that's good. And if not, then I'll make a PDF and that'll be my homework for today. And then just let me know. And then that said, let's get started with the fun stuff. Fun stuff is, of course, a relative term. Okay, good. Thank you, Zafina. Okay, so I wanted to start with, and this is your discussion materials for this discussion. So if you want to go back to any of this stuff, it's all here because I know there's a lot there, and there's supposed to be in this list more than what you necessarily need to like read and take in. This is sort of like extra reading in the discussion materials section. So our goals today are kind of to talk about, last time we talked about actual dance moves, we were looking at like the buck and the wing movements and looking, like starting to get an idea to how they link together to more contemporary Black dances. And today I want to talk about how we, especially as Americans, have been taught to have racial stereotypes in our mind, and stereotypes about movement, stereotypes about class that we probably had no idea, and our parents probably had no idea that they were passing along. So like, how do we get these ideas that create implicit bias in our minds? And content warning, obviously we're talking about slavery here. We're going to talk a little bit about minstrelsy and Black stereotypes, and that can be totally triggering. I get that. Also, I just want to acknowledge again that I am a white woman, so I'm not going to do the best job at this as a person of color. It would be great if we had more people of color teaching these kinds of things, which is why I'm teaching you guys, because your generation is much more diverse than my generation of college graduates. And so I want to pass this work on. So I'm going to do my best, but it will not be perfect. And it's okay to tell me when I mess up, please. Okay. I'm just going to say that over and over again for like the next month, and then I'll stop. Okay, so let's start here with this video, and we're just going to watch a couple minutes of it at the end. But the question I'm going to ask you at the end is to share, if you will, some, and you can do it in the chat now if you want. What are some ridiculous things you have maybe heard people say about slavery in our country, like stereotypes, or if you have any maybe family members or people that you've met who are kind of slavery deniers or who make excuses for racism in this country. I want to like stir up the conversation by inviting you to share some of those things that you've heard. And in the meanwhile, I'm going to play the last couple minutes of this.
Running away. Although some slaves like Joseph Davis escaped slavery for good by running away to free states or Canada, where they didn't have to worry about fugitive slave laws, even more slaves ran away temporarily, hiding out in the woods or the swamps and eventually returning. No one knows exactly how many slaves escaped to freedom, but the best estimate is that 1,000 or so a year made the journey north. Most fugitive slaves were young men, but the most famous runaway has been hanging out behind me all day long. Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman escaped to Philadelphia at the age of 29, and over the course of her life, she made about 20 trips back to Maryland to help friends and relatives make the journey north on the Underground Railroad. But a more dramatic form of resistance to slavery was actual armed rebellion, which was attempted. Now, individuals sometimes took matters into their own hands and beat or even killed their white overseers or masters, like Bob, the guy who received the arbitrary beating, responded to it by killing his overseer with a hoe. But that said, large-scale slave uprisings were relatively rare. The four most famous ones all took place in a 35-year period at the beginning of the 19th century. Gabriel's Rebellion in 1800, which we talked about before, was discovered before he was able to carry out his plot. Then in 1811, a group of slaves upriver from New Orleans seized cane knives and guns and marched on the city before militia stopped them. And in 1822, Denmark Vesey, a former slave who had purchased his freedom, may have organized a plot to destroy Charleston, South Carolina. I say may have because the evidence against him is disputed and comes from a trial that was not fair. But regardless, the end result of that trial is that he was executed, as were 34 slaves. But the most successful slave rebellion, at least in the sense that they actually killed some people, was Nat Turner's in August 1831. Turner was a preacher, and with a group of about 80 slaves, he marched from farm to farm in Southampton County, Virginia, killing the inhabitants, most of whom were women and children, because the men were attending a religious revival meeting in North Carolina. Turner and 17 other rebels were captured and executed, but not before they struck terror into the hearts of whites all across the American South. Virginia's response was to make slavery worse, passing even harsher laws that forbade slaves from preaching and prohibited teaching them to read. Other slave states followed Virginia's lead, and by the 1830s, slavery had grown, if anything, more harsh. So this shows that large-scale armed resistance was, Django Unchained aside, not just suicidal, but also a threat to loved ones and really to all slaves. But it is hugely important to emphasize that slaves did resist their oppression. Sometimes this meant taking up arms, but usually it meant more subtle forms of resistance, like intentional work slowdowns or sabotaging equipment or pretending not to understand instructions. And most importantly, in the face of systematic legal and cultural degradation, they reaffirmed their humanity through family and through faith. Why is this so important? Because too often in America, we still talk about slaves as if they failed to rise up, when in fact, rising up would not have made life better for them or for their families. The truth is, sometimes carving out an identity as a human being in a social order that is constantly seeking to dehumanize you is the most powerful form of resistance. Refusing to become the chattel that their masters believed them to be is what made slavery untenable and the Civil War inevitable. So make no mistake, slaves fought back, and in the end, they won. I'll see you next week. Crash Course is produced and directed by Stan Muller. The script supervisor is Meredith Danko. Our associate producer is Danica Johnson. The show is written by...
Wrong pause button. There we go. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that I wish I had that little excerpt of lecture spoken by a person of color, but that's what we could find. We meaning me. So if you see something that you like even better, feel free to please send me more clips to share as usual. But what I love about the ending of that little history lesson is the fact that he brings it back to this idea of how subtle and human moments become an act of rebellion. And he was talking at the very end, he showed us pictures of Black slaves practicing their religion, getting married, forming family bonds. But you notice the first picture he showed was actually a picture of two Black slaves dancing.
Dancing. Yeah, I also noticed it.
Yeah. So, and that is really like one of the core ideas behind how dance becomes an act of community rebellion. And I invited you to bring me some dances. Let's see if we can watch Crystals now, that you suggest are maybe not understood in the same way now as they're intended, or by the group that created them versus the group that danced them or watched them. I'm just going to put this on mute so we can watch it in the background. One of the things that I think is so stirring about dance for most of us is that it is an expression of individual emotion. And as you heard in that lecture, the expression of emotion, the expression of humanity of the slaves was actually like legally removed more and more and more through the anti-slave laws that were basically repercussions of slaves trying to escape slavery in the 1800s, and then in also new Jim Crow laws, the idea that the government could take away a person's right to read, a person's right to religion, and a person's right to perform music or do play drums, all as a form of preventing rebellion, is part of how we end up with dance as a form of expression that is rebellion. So we mentioned how drumming was thought by the white people to be a form of like sort of egging on the rebellion during some of those actual fights. And so they banned the use of drums in America. And so then what do you have when you have nothing? All you have is your body, right? You don't have land. You probably don't own the clothes on your back. You don't own the freedom to marry who you want. You don't even own your children as a slave. If you can imagine that, like you don't own your mom and dad, you don't get to stay with them, you just get shipped off wherever someone sells you. So all you really have is your own body. And that's why making art with your body, playing music with your body, dancing with other people with your body becomes an act in and of itself of reclaiming the self, reclaiming the body, and insisting that you are an individual and a human being. Yeah. So this is beautiful, but I'm going to take us back to the history. So where's my page that I'm working from today? Boop, 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 ba-doop, ba-doo. Oh, it's this one. Okay. So in the article, the second article that I was asking you guys if you can see, we learn a little bit more about some of the stereotypes that came up in the 1800s and 1900s, and that's going to head us into looking more deeply at minstrelsy in the next couple of weeks, which is, not fun. But what I wanted to talk about today is some of those basic stereotypes and how they were used as a way of, as Josh brought up, sort of brainwashing the white people to play along with racism and slavery. So in some of these early rebellions, it was not just the Black slaves that stood up against the white slave owners. It was in the very early rebellions, there were actually poor white people who were indentured servants. They definitely had a step above the place of a slave. So a slave who was brought over and bought and sold never would be free, did not own their children. A white indentured servant who might have come from the UK either as a, lots of them came over because they had nothing and were trying to make a better life, but they couldn't afford passage. So they would be sold into indentured servitude for a number of years, usually about 6. Or sometimes they would come over because they were escaping a death sentence, which was you could have a death sentence for something far less than murder, just like a bunch of small time robbery get you eventually a death sentence back then. So those white people who came over who were indentured servants did not have it anywhere near as bad as slaves. Let's be perfectly clear about that, because there are people who don't know that. Yes, but in the beginning, it was not uncommon for those two working class sets of people to rise up together, and they in fact did. And that is part of how Josh's point, where the white people were convinced to buy into the idea of slavery and racism, that's part of where it came from. So when the original workers rose up, the legal system and the elites responded by separating those two classes even further. So the white people who were poor working class were allowed to learn to read, and they were allowed to practice their religion and have gatherings and go do whatever they wanted after their workday. Whereas the slaves were oppressed even more and denied education and denied freedom of marriage in some cases, because the slave owners would choose who you were mated with, literally mated with, because they were breeding slaves, right? So that's the initial seed of what now we see having grown into this delusion about slavery not being so bad, is in order to make not all of the working class rise up against the rich landowners, they had to separate those two classes, the poor whites and the slaves, so that they couldn't band together, or so that they wouldn't band together, because that they could not stand up against. So then there became this idea that slavery was really a nice thing that those great slave owners did to help out those savage, air quotation marks, Black people. And this was also part of the way that they convinced working class white people to not identify with the Black slaves at the time, because the people in power started convincing others to believe in this myth that there was somehow a difference in the races that made Black people less human than white people. And one of the ways that that works in dance is those stereotypes. I wish I had an image here. I do, but we're going to get to the image later on. So the stereotypes about specific quote unquote types of Black characters, especially in minstrelsy. So one would be Jim Crow, who is the slave who was working on the docks, that a white man stole his clothes, stole his dance moves, and danced them on stage and became super, super famous. And literally that Black man was standing backstage naked, trying to get back to work. Like, he'd probably been talked into it or ordered into it, but he's literally like begging for his clothes from backstage while this white man takes his dance moves and makes money off them. That is one stereotype that obviously stayed through with us, because in later times the laws were named after that. Another one is Zip Coon, and Zip Coon stereotype has to do with it's usually like a tall Black man who's well-dressed, or his well-dressed clothes might be really aged. So it might be like a tuxedo, but with patches on it. And the idea behind Zip Coon is a great example of how a stereotype flips. And throughout this whole semester, we're really going to talk about how stereotypes flip back and forth and become both forms of oppression and forms of power. So if you think about Zip Coon, the white people saw Zip Coon character as a Black man trying to imitate white culture by dressing up, air quotes, and that this, in racist white minds, was so impossible that it became comedic. But there's another layer to that. So if you are a Black audience watching a performer of Zip Coon, or watching a Black man who is well-dressed, who's being comedic on stage, you know that that extra layer is that that Black man wearing these quote unquote super fancy clothes is actually making fun of the rich white people who are oppressing you, in a way that the white people are laughing, so they're not beating you. Does that kind of make sense, how that works in two directions? Like, if you are if you're letting the people who are oppress you laugh, then you're getting away with making fun of them. And a great example of this we'll get to, if we haven't already, is the cakewalk. Let me pull up this image for you in the background. Oh. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. So the cakewalk, there's not real sound on any of these really old things, so it's fine to watch them without sound. The cakewalk was actually literally Black people dressing up as their white slave owners and making fun of the snobby, upright way that they walked. That was where this dance craze originally came from. And its legacy in the long run is that you get this idea of people standing on the sides and someone walking down in the middle doing the best walk that they possibly can, which is, of course, the format for a Soul Train dance, right? And it came literally from the slaves making fun of their owners in a way that the owners thought was so entertaining that they laughed at it and didn't think it was anything serious. And they thought that it was the slaves trying to seriously imitate them, but failing, when in all actuality, it was initially the slaves just making fun of the white people. Good on them. This little image here is kind of great because you can actually see there's like that upright bounciness of the jig elements of dancing. Yeah. And there is definitely some wing dancing. Check out that wing dancing. Those are the same legs in the Charleston, the same swiveling legs in the Tootsie Roll from the 90s. But all of those elements are part of basically a rebellion against the slave owners. Another stereotype that we're going to talk about more in the future is the stereotype of Black women that happened a lot in minstrelsy, which was usually that the Black woman would be extremely sexually available and monstrous. So we'll get to that later on. I just want to not just talk about men all the time, right? Trying to talk about everybody here. And so let's pause for a second. I see a comment in here. Insana says, whites felt they could not have control of Blacks if they had too much education. And that is true to this day, right? I mean, I think that truth, which we definitely know to be true in the time of, Virginia taking away the right to read for Black people, but also I think that legacy is part of why it burns so much when we don't equally fund our schools in poor neighborhoods and rich neighborhoods, right? Is because our nation has a history of purposefully trying to make lower classes stupider in order to control them. So let's call out some horrible things you've heard some white people say in this country. Or maybe not even white people. What are some horrible things?
I've heard like stories of how like like way back, like the 3/5 compromise was actually there to like help slaves in a way. I don't I mean I've heard it before. Actually, I can't like speak on like how the argument works, but I've heard that like supposedly the 3/5 compromise was there to like help slaves. Like I think the argument is like, well, at least they're like part of a person, not like none of a person. But I don't know. I mean, I've never really understood that argument.
Yeah, I mean, it's true because at the time, people were trying to convince other people that Black people were not worth humanity at all. So they did talk into that quote unquote compromise. How it could be a compromise when there weren't Black people in the government is a question that we should be asking, right? But that is what they argued at the time. Safina, you look like you might be typing. I'm hoping you're about to share something. Okay, let me ask you this question. Who has heard the myth about Irish slaves? Anybody? You've got reaction buttons too. Oh, ooh, there's more reaction buttons. Okay, so don't fall for this. There were not Irish slaves, but 2020, it was a doozy. So one of these old myths that got re-brought up again was this idea of Irish slaves. And there was, in fact, a ship of Irish indentured students. I know sometimes the homework is bad, but it's not that bad. Irish indentured servants did go down in the Atlantic, and it was about 150 indentured servants who died. And the listing of that ship going down, which of course was insured, so you know that white people in the North made money off of slavery, even though they were in the North. That has been called Irish slaves and been used, especially in the last year, among right-wing conspiracy theorists as an argument that slavery was not just about Blacks, which is an argument about making people who are slavery denier or racism deniers feel better about the fact that they're not owning what happened in this country. And they do that by saying, oh, but it happened to white people too. So just to be clear, the indentured students of that, indentured slaves, I keep saying students is cracking me up, I'm sorry. Those indentured servants have been equated to the status of Black people in America during the civil rights. So like 1950s, 1960s is about the class status that those indentured servants had. So obviously not the same thing, but still pretty horrible, right? You can't get equal pay, you get shouted at in the streets, there's definitely lynching going on. Like, it was bad, but it was nothing compared to chattel slavery. So if you hear that, now you know how to counter it. All right, so what's next in my list of things for you? That's not the list I want. Yes. So I wanted to ask you guys sort of these questions here. What, especially the stuff that we just reviewed today, was there anything here that sounds totally new to you in terms? Yes, you're totally right, Zafina. People say wasn't that bad, and that's usually what they're talking about. They sort of imagine that it's as bad as it was in the civil rights era, I guess is what they're imagining. That was not the case. It was not the case at all. So I wanted to ask you guys, with all of your different backgrounds, because some of us went to high school and learned about different history in different places. Was there new information here that you learned this week about slavery? And do you feel that your education in high school made it clear that chattel slavery is not the same as an indentured servitude, and the difference in the humanity of it? Or do you feel like in your generation's experience that education is getting better? Because I would say 20, 30 years ago, it probably wasn't clear enough. And that's part of why we're having so much strife in our country right now. No wrong answers here, just throw any ideas out, please.
Wait, so I just wanted to clarify about, because like I'm trying to like think, because like I think I might have misinterpreted the reading, because like
Okay.
it did bring up like Zip Coon and stuff like that, but just to clarify, so wait, that was like a satirical character created by Black people to kind of like mock, like.
No, I think I'm being unclear about it. Those characters were stereotypes mimicked by white performers, but also mimicked again by Black performers. So
Oh,
we're gonna I'm getting a little bit ahead of us to kind of lead us into minstrelsy and the Chitlin circuit. So there were Black and white performers performing these stereotypes at the same time, which makes no sense. Like, why would you perform a stereotype of your own people, and why would people come to watch it? Which is what minstrelsy was all about. But like, as long as you were performing something that the white people thought was entertaining because they thought that you were too stupid to understand it, but really you were getting one over on them while they were thinking they were getting one over on you. That's how minstrelsy sort of functioned in that time. So that's a great question.
Wait, so just to clarify, so Jim Crow and Zip Coon, their origins, like they were definitely created by white people, but Black people like performed those characters on their own to kind of like make like white people satisfied and kind of like happy and
So,
okay, got it.
Black people would perform them both. Well, so we had so much segregation also that like the Black people couldn't. There were rules about how many Black people could perform in the same room as white people. So you had these two different traveling circuits of shows. And for sure, the white people would be performing for the white people based on stereotypes of Black people. But then there would also be Black people who were entertainers who both influenced the white performers by like creating the dances, for example, with Jim Crow, who like did his dance and then the white person imitated it. And then all of these Black performers seeing how popular it was, because of course the white performers and the white touring companies had publicity, which is money, right? So then the Black performers would take those things back, do them better again as a way to get more fame themselves and to get more gigs. Because we really, especially in this time, we don't have the same sense of copyright that now we talk about copyright a lot. And like, it's sort of a weird thing in the late 2000s, this whole like TikTok idea that you make a dance and then everybody copies it. That's actually more like what it was during the times of minstrelsy. But like,
oh, I see.
in the
Yeah,
90s and 2000s, there was a big focus and push for like supposedly unique and individual work. And that's we'll talk about that whole thing as like and sort of a creation of white dance, actually. The idea of like unique solo artist genius creating a thing that no one's ever seen before, and then holding that ideal as higher than community dances or dances that like you might do, and that the point of it was to get everybody else to do it with you, which is what community dance is all about. Yeah, and then that is what TikTok replicates. So that's how you have those stereotypes being copied, recreated, and having layers of meaning, both on the white minstrelsy stage and also on the Chitlin circuit, where Black people are performing for Black people these dances, knowing that they're both performing stereotypes that are negative for their own people, but also that there is like people say a wink and a nod, like, I know that you know that I know better, is going on at that time, for sure. But you might not receive as much abuse from the people in power if you're performing sort of under the guise of,
because it goes over their heads and they just think
exactly,
they're under the impression that they're like too stupid, like they can't be capable of having that kind of thinking and like being satirical. Oh, I see.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's so important to spend time thinking about right now, because that really, the fact that Black people had to pretend to be stupid in order to get a leg up economically or in popularity is absolutely part of the reason why so many, it freed them to play that game, but it also let the white people continue to think that they were right in their racism. Does that kind of make sense?
Like
there's
a
no good
double-edged
answer.
sword. Like
Exactly.
yeah. Oh.
Yeah. So can you think of how that plays out today? Is sort of a question I'd love to leave you guys with. I mean, here's maybe a doorway that makes a little more sense. Since I am assuming, but I could be wrong, I'm assuming that most of the folks taking this class are young people. Yes, you're mostly like, usually more than half of the class is 18 to 24. So in that stage of life, which is a fabulous stage of life to be in, it gets better, but it's a fabulous stage of life to be in. Usually there's a huge emotional, hormonal, and cultural push to get your own sense of identity out, to break free from whatever it was in your parents' life, your home life, or your local life doesn't seem to be working, right? To like gain independence. That's what this stage of life in college is all about. And if you just came out of American high school, you probably were in a place where there were a lot of stereotypes. For example, the slut, or the bad boy, or the jock, right? Those are all stereotypes that may or may not be racial in the high school that you went to, but are probably, possibly also related to class. And what I find really interesting in culture is that usually pop culture is playing upon those stereotypes. So if you are thinking about the people that you went to high school with, can you think of like maybe a bad boy or a slut, air quotes, who everybody talked badly about, but at the same time they had a social power over other people because they were wrangling that reputation. And a good example of that is often like the bad boy, like people, maybe he's sort of given permission by people to bully other people. That could be true of the jock stereotype as well, because that stereotype gives him an acting reputation that people will sort of back away and give more space to than just like one of the everybody else people. Certainly, I think that's true. As a woman, I can identify with the idea of the slut caricature in high school, right? Like people will say negative things, but then at the same time, the people who might want to be sexually active with that person will do things for that person who they have a quote unquote better chance of getting sexually active with, right? So there's both shame and power mixed into wielding a stereotype in a social situation. So let me level this up by adding it to art. And this will be sort of my closing thing for you to ponder. Please bring back an example if you think of something. Think about a stereotypical pop star's, like a long-term pop star's path. So I'm talking here, all three of these women did the same thing. Madonna, Lady Gaga, Taylor Swift, oh, Miley Cyrus. All three of these people have the same stereotypical path. You start out as girl next door pop star, right? Oops, I did it again. Britney Spears, Taylor Swift with her country music. You get big, that's pretty hard. We'll talk all about the money in the first place. That's hard. But once you get super popular, you've got some albums out, what do you do next? Well, you get enough power to break away from your record company a little bit, maybe, but you also need to refresh your image and get more popularity and do something that's not just the same thing. And all of those pop stars then switched. They all had like a coming of age sexual album, right? So like Taylor Swift went bad. Britney Spears went nasty. Like it's definitely something that works in our country in terms of wielding power. And I don't mean that in just, I don't mean to suggest that that is a sign of weakness, right? It is usually a sign of that person, especially for women, because we have been so often controlled by our sexuality, which is to say, like, usually because of owning who the children belong to in a patriarchy, that publicizing and taking control of a woman publicizing and taking control of her own sexuality in public is a way of owning her own body. And maybe we can argue that for men that can often be a man expressing himself as more confident or more physically powerful, or I would even say more like business suit powerful might be a similar path, right? Like country guy becomes the boss, which seems like just no big deal for a white man to like become a boss and a husband and have a sexual life. But if you put those actions on a person of color, for example, in the time of civil rights and even today, like it's sometimes hard for some people to accept that a Black man might be a leader in his community, totally well educated, a great father, and to have like a healthy sexual relationship with their partners that isn't twisted in the same way that our culture was taught in the time of Zip Coon to think that a man of color dressing in nice clothes was somehow impossible to do elegantly. Does that sort of give you something to chew on for the week as we start to look at minstrelsy? I know it's a lot, right? Like, what? So that's, yes? Oh, we got a thumbs up. So there's something to think about. How does stereotypes about sexuality and money, how do they work in our country, both as ways to shame people and keep them down, like you can't possibly do this, and also as ways for people to take power back? Dun, 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 dun. Okay, do you guys have questions about any of that stuff? I'm gonna take us on a drive through next week, but I wanna have you guys ask me any questions you have. Please, 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 because you know, if you have a question, someone else has it too. All right, week 4. Oh my goodness. Already week 4. Oh, do you guys have any questions about Lavan elements? For example, did they make sense to you?
I'm just kind of, I think this is just more of like a hyper technical question, like, because I think in the video it talks about 5, but on the slides it shows only 4.
Okay.
Like, is that something we need to be concerned about with like the quiz or anything like that? Because I think in the video it says body, space, time, effort, and action as like the 5th one, but in here it removes action. Like, is that like a hyper technical thing we need to worry
Yeah,
about?
that's a pretty hyper technical thing. And also because the Lavan did body, space, time, and effort, and action has each of those elements. But as we're talking about like elements of dance in the broader discussion and later teachers, some people may get a list of 5 things that like action is an element of dance. But Laban's elements are those first 4, right? Because there is an action on the body and there's an action, like action moves you in space, and action has a timing or speed, and action has effort. So no, I'm not going to ask you like list these 4. In fact, I think there was a quiz question that I hope I fixed that said 5 instead of 4 at one point. So that would be me getting the same thing wrong.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah. And in that quiz, remember your quizzes are open all semester long. They're supposed to help you study. So if you took the quiz and it went terribly, you can retake the quiz. But like, try not to retake the written part of the quiz. The key to getting the written part of the quiz A+, is to answer all of the prompts. So when you read the question, it says, for example, does it blah, does it blah, does it blah? If you run through and answer each of those, you're definitely getting 100% on that part of the quiz. Hey, good tip. But mostly I just want you guys to practice to use more adjectives and more action words when you're describing dance. Because sometimes I see things like a description that'll say, oh, they moved all over the place. But like, if your reader, you want to assume your reader hasn't seen what you're describing. So then you need to say they moved all over the small stage that they used from close to the camera to far away from the camera. They moved up and down by jumping. They rolled on the floor from the left to the right, or they traveled in a diagonal. Yeah. So actually describing that stuff when we're talking about dance as though your reader hasn't seen it is what I'm looking for in that quiz. Yeah. That was a good question. And anything else on 3 we didn't cover? This is sort of the check yourself avoiding cliches page is really about helping you to write about everything better. So it's a writing cue. Okay, next week. Fun videos faux show. So we're going to talk about the idea of exoticism. And that links to our conversation today about minstrelsy and stereotypes, because exoticism as an idea is a way of stereotyping other communities that aren't the community of privilege. And so in the next section, 4B, we're going to talk about how colonialism in general made this idea of the exotic, which is weird because, you know, most people were doing community dances within their communities, and then it's just that these white people of privilege had the money and ability to turn them into entertainment, and that made it othered those dances, quote unquote, othered those dances. So we're going to talk about how that happened in the Chicago's World Fair and world fairs all over the world, how colonial structures would go in, take over a country, and then bring back examples of those different cultures to the world's fairs, including in America, the way that the white people came and took Native Americans out of the reservations where we had, you know, killed them and forced them to live in small places and then put them on stage and said, wow, look at this exotic Native dance. And how when we talk about appropriation versus authenticity, that's what that section is about as well. So we'll touch on how putting a community dance on stage changes it, and also how seeing something as other is exotic is a way of making it more tasty to privileged audiences. And that will let us into watching a bunch of great dance like breakdance, acrobatics, circus acts, which were all dance steps that were happening with community on the community level and that got put on stage at that time. So that's what next week is going to be leading into. It's like 2 weeks of circus. It's pretty exciting. Breakdance and circus coming up. Anything else I can answer for you guys? No? We're good? Okay. If you have questions, that will be awesome. If you have breakdance or circus video clips that you want to bring for our next discussion, please do. The best thing about, well, one of the best things about 2020 is that Cirque du Soleil put like almost all of their work online for free. I'm sure it won't last forever, but we'll start out with some fun Cirque du Soleil clips just to get us spiced up at the beginning of next time. Sound good? Okay. Thank you guys. If you have questions, I'm here. Otherwise, I will see you next week.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye. It's good to see you. Thank you. You too. Bye, Josh.
Actually,
That was a
yeah,
good
it's like,
question. I love
yeah,
questions.
yeah, sorry. I get really anxious in front of other people. I usually wait till the end.
That's fine.
Um,
Are
so
you okay? It's still recording. Is that okay?
yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a technical question regarding the quiz because I actually haven't taken it. I get really anxious when I see like quiz and stuff like that. Like, I just want to ask, so like, so I do plan on taking it today. I just want to know the technicalities in regards to retrying it. So let's just say I take it today and I don't know, I get like a 70, 75 maybe. Um, if I retook it, like let's just say like the next day or any day after Friday, like I know it's still open, but will I be like deducted points?
Mm-mm.
Like if I get 100% on like if I took it Friday, got 70%, but I retook it Saturday and I got 100%, like would it actually be 100% or would it be like, oh well, I mean, since you took it Saturday, like
Yep.
it'll be 90% of what you, oh okay.
So
Oh,
here's how to see that. So this has 2 attempts on it. Most of the quizzes have more. This one's just limited because I can only grade so many written answers. So you have the due date, yes, and the available until date. This is actually really quite late, but oh well, I guess I made it nice. And with all of the quizzes that you have allowed attempts, multiple allowed attempts, so this one says 2, most of them say unlimited, you get the highest score that you earned on those quizzes out of all of your attempts. And I do not have late penalties in this class for anything. So as long as you do it by the available until date,
mhm.
you're going to get all the points that you get, like your highest score out of everything. The due date on these quizzes is because I want you guys to be able to, well, not fall behind because there's a lot of material, but also like I'd like you to do them. Like it would be great if you took this test yesterday and failed it and then showed up to our discussion with questions for me and then retook it afterwards, understanding better. Like, oh, I got to ask you a
Oh, I
question
see.
about it, and then you go back and take it again and get 100%.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I'm so sorry. Hold on, let me write that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad we're still recording. You hear that, everybody? Like, take a quiz and do it badly, and then come to discussion or watch the recording of the discussion. Ask me the questions and go back and you'll get full credit when you do it the next time. That's the idea.
Okay. And I
Um,
think that's pretty much it. I was just like panicking over like the technicalities of like how that would be and stuff like that. But I think that should be pretty much it. So yeah, thank you, Professor. Have a great weekend.
You too. Hey, Josh, can I ask you a question before you go?
Mhm.
Can you see these questions? I mean, these pictures? Because I asked tech support about it and I was like, why is this not showing up?
You know, honestly, so the reason why I asked a lot about the technicalities is because hold on, let me check on my phone because like on my phone,
Here, let me.
I don't think I can see it on my phone, and I don't know if this is worth mentioning. On my phone, I can't see it. I don't know if that's just like a phone problem, a me problem,
Here,
but
I'm gonna
on my
put
like
this link.
desktop, I should be able to see it. I just realized that earlier this morning because like I usually view stuff on my phone because my phone's right next to me, but I just checked this morning because a lot of things there's a lot of things I can't see on my phone through Canvas, but like I think I'm realizing when I'm on my desktop, like I guess with that particular page, yeah, I do actually see the images
Okay,
and
good.
like the text.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like yeah.
So you can see a picture there, not just this annoying question mark.
Yeah, it's like yeah, there's like
Okay.
a person with their
I'm gonna paint
supporting
you
leg and then
here.
I guess like yeah, yeah.
Okay. And this, I think, is like a black man who's like almost parallel with the floor, right? In a hinge.
Yeah, remarkably, yes. Oh my God, yeah. Yes.
Okay, that's good. And are you looking on your phone right now or a desktop?
So on my desktop, yes. I don't know. Maybe it's because like your phone compresses it. Here on, let me double check. I don't know because my phone.
Because I
I mean,
am
I've.
asking, I'm talking to tech support about this right now, and so it's very helpful to me to know what you guys are actually seeing.
So on my phone, okay, now it is. You know, honestly, yeah. So on my phone and on my desktop, sorry. I think it's probably a Wi-Fi issue just with my phone. Yeah, I
Okay.
don't know. Yeah, but actually I'm looking back at it now because maybe I didn't wait long enough. I couldn't see the images before, it was just plain white. But yeah, now I can see the images. Everything that like that's supposed to be there is there on both my phone and on my computer desktop.
Okay. Cool. So that's a good thing for me to just say out loud is like, if folks, if you're taking a quiz and you can't see the images, I mean, maybe you want to just take the quiz and know that you can take it again, but do let me know, because sometimes when I import from semester to semester, some of these links to the images break, which drives me bananas, but I can't tell what you guys can see. For example, this, like, it's not showing up for me, but it is showing up for you. So that's really good. And there are definitely images in the quizzes that you need to be able to see. Like there's a lot of GIFs where there's movement and I'm asking you to identify things. So if you can't see them, please let me know so that I can, or help button, your friend. Those people are really helpful. So, okay. Thank you for that feedback. I really appreciate it.
And I think one last thing now that you mentioned it. So I know there's short answers. Like, are they more open? Because like, are they more open ended? Because like I know in the beginning it says like you can have like your own interpretation and stuff like that. Like, is there like? Because I know, I mean, of course, I'll try to use like vocabulary terms and stuff like that, like pirouette, like plie, and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
I just want to know how open ended it really means, because I know that some people like when it comes to short responses, it's like, okay, you can have like your own opinion, but make sure you hit these points. I just want to know, like, I mean, I'll use my vocabulary terms, but is there any like strict things that need to be in like my
Yes.
short
And
response?
I usually re-edit all of my questions to make it really clear in the question what I'm looking for. So this quiz's questions are all about like describing the elements, sorry, at work in any video. You get to pick a video to write about. So it's not so much asking you about your opinion about the dance, which your opinion does not have to be the same as my opinion about dance. It's, I was watching Gary's talk about that recently, and he said, you know, think of it like food. Like we don't have to like the same food. We just have to be able to describe it in this class. And part of what we're doing by learning these vocabulary words is learning how to use academic terminology to describe dances. So, you know, like being able to describe dance in terms of, as I was saying, like where it is in space, like is it close to the camera, is it far from the camera, is it jumping up and down in space, is it that the hands moving really fast but the head's moving slowly, right? Would be a timing issue. Is it looking like it's really full of effort even though it's not actually a lot of effort, or vice versa, like ballet looks light and easy but it's so hard, right? So those are what those written questions are here. And in the questions themselves, why don't we just preview it? Because you can take it more than once, so it doesn't matter, right? Let's go down. Yeah, see, none of my pictures. I know they're going to tell me to start using Firefox again. Dang it. So this is one of the written questions. See this, for example? Those are totally the bullet points that I'm looking for when I'm grading, right? Like, I want you to tell me how many dancers there are. Do they dance together or separately? Do they blah, blah, blah? Do they blah, blah, blah? If you're
Oh,
hitting
like
those
answering
points,
each of those prompts. Oh, so those are the prompts you were talking about.
yeah.
Okay.
And you can see
Oh, I
that
see.
I have added them to all of these questions, right?
Oh,
So a question that wouldn't get all the points, in this case, it's not an opinion question. So, but in general, when I'm writing a question that's a short answer, I'm going to give you hints about what bullet points I'm looking at.
I
So,
see.
yeah. I really try to help you guys get an A+. I want you guys to get good grades.
Actually, oh my God, I'm realizing I can't believe like I come up with like all these technical questions.
No, it's
So like if you
good.
retry it, like because I see there's multiple, like because I was anticipating like the multiple choice questions, but if you retry it,
Mhm.
will your answers, like your written answers, be saved, or should I just like write it on a separate like text editor and like copy and paste it?
Sure can.
Okay, cool. Okay,
Um,
okay.
I don't remember.
Because I know it
Yeah,
didn't do
this
that.
one, I don't think
Mhm.
you can see this from your view, but this one is set to view your responses. So if you take it one time and you're going to take it again, you do need to either retake the multiple, you need to do the whole thing again, not just part of it, because I only see it in one chunk. But this one will let you look at your own responses. So you could copy and paste if you, for example, were happy with your written responses but did badly on the multiple choice part. This
Oh,
one
I
lets you do
see.
that.
Okay. Okay, got it. Okay. I think that's pretty much it for now. Sorry again,
No,
but
those are great questions. I'm glad that we have them saved for other folks because I'm sure other people are wanting to know.
okay, so I think in that case, I should be good for now. I'll make sure to email you if I have any other questions. But yeah, so have a great weekend, Professor.
You too. Thanks for all your input.
Okay, bye.